Welcome to my new bedroom. Hello, it's me, Trixie. Welcome to my new bedroom in my new place. Wow, it's Vic's old place. This was a place that was full of Vic's stuff, and now it's full of my stuff. Actually, some of my stuff was already here, but that's because I had left it here a long time ago. If I'm sniffly during this video, it's because this house is dusty as hell. I've been here for a couple of nights now. I haven't really had the chance to deep clean it. Been too busy, getting things set up, cooking and cleaning and everything, doing everyday stuff while also getting everything set up. This video is going to be something like an open letter to another YouTuber, a younger YouTuber named Shitty Kickflips or Rhyme Kickflip. I would highly recommend her channel if you like my content. It's surreal in a way because she's very clearly influenced by me to such an extent that for me, it feels like watching a young Trixie, which is not something that ever existed, mind you. Like, not a young Beatrice, me, but like if somehow you could reverse engineer the anime character that I use in my swap videos into a person. Apologies if that's a super weird thing to say, but that was the vibe I felt, even though there's enough distinct about her content that it's also exciting to me, that it feels like something I wish I had done, rather than something that's like identical to anything I ever actually did. She wrote me an email basically asking for sort of general advice about how to be a creator, as a endeavor. I'm just kind of paraphrasing exactly what she asked for, but I ended up having so many thoughts reading it that I was like, this is too much for me to unpack into just like the text of one email, and also everything I'm going to say will be important to anybody else in the same position, so I should just make a video about it. I think a lot about how back in the day, they used to call certain people like a man of letters. I want to see myself as a woman of letters, and problematically, I don't write enough letters. And what I mean by that is, for most of the time that people were writing, we didn't have the ability to like instantly mass produce our writing. And so most of the time, people who wrote like a lot were just sending it by mail to one another, like to other writers, like basically DMs, but by mail, And that was the main way that people like communicated. And so when you said you were sending letters, like that didn't just mean like, oh, the envelope is like something you send to another person is called a letter. Like you are literally sending individual letters, like a bunch of letters, and there was not really other contexts that letters are sent, back then. So to me, everything we're doing on the internet, it is sending letters. It's the same concept. We are people of letters here online, but also you can send letters, written at the hyperfast rate of speech if you are capable of such things. So, I think people just generally choose words more quickly now than ever before in history. Anyway, basically, I'm just trying to encourage more people to write letters, whether they be closed letters or open letters, but especially letters to other people of letters. All the great writers also wrote great correspondence that we eventually found out about anyways, because of course somebody's gonna like eventually it becomes historical, that these letters exist. They're still physically there, whoever they end up with, unless they get thrown away, which on the internet doesn't really happen. The reason I included that segment just there about the letters is to scare people away, certain types of people. This is one of the things I'm going to teach about in this video, is creating sort of like soft walls in your content, like stuff that are filters, soft filters basically. Like if you can scare away certain people, like it's a little much for me to like come into a video and be like, who I hate? Cis white scum. Like it would make me seem like a super political channel, and like that was what it was going to be about or something like that. But there are things I can do to not make you feel like insulted just on the basis of your own existence, but more so disinterested. Like I can convince you you're not interested in the content without having to be quite so aggressive or to scare away the wrong people, you know? So there's always a aspect of subtlety in creating like barriers, you know? And part of what Rhyme asked about in this email was like, how do I manage like the presentation of myself versus the art, you know, art versus artist? How do I keep them at like a safe distance, or, you know, I guess, how do I judge? How do, you know, what is a safe distance? I'm going to have to basically boil all advice down to a couple core aspects and then use a bunch of examples to explain what I mean by those core aspects. The title of this video should be something like Practical Creativity. And I thought about calling it Creativity is Practical, but I feel like that signifies more of like that I'm going to be making the argument for why that is the case. Let's just assume that you already agree with that. And this is more about how to be practical with your creativity. So, you know, this is more of like an advice, like how to approach what you're doing creatively in a practical lens and like fit it into your life in like a reasonable way, not looking at it as something just kind of ephemeral or unmanageable, you know, which is I think stuff that I felt about my art for a very long time, was that it was so hard to define for me that I didn't know how to control it and how to make it benefit me, how to use it as a tool to my benefit. It feels like I had to recreate the same things over and over and over and over again and kind of remake the same points because I didn't really know what I was trying to say. And sometimes that's unavoidable. You know, there's certain stuff you're always going to find yourself repeating. But I think it helps a lot if you can, from the beginning, you know, have at least a clear sense of what you are trying to accomplish through your creativity. Whether or not you really know what it's saying or how you're doing it even, what really matters is that you understand what are you trying to accomplish with this. In my case, I'm basically trying to talk to someone who, as I just described, is for all intents and purposes like a younger version of myself, but better because they live in the present instead of you know instead of back then. How do I help someone like this avoid the mistakes I made and get to use their art in a more practical sense? Because when you make mistakes, all of it gets more difficult. Like every time you really fuck up, you are gonna have to work that much harder to get back to where you were. So if everything is already difficult for you, which is how I felt, you know, for my whole life up until like this week, moving into this place, you know, I suddenly feel like as long as I make enough money to keep this situation happening, life is suddenly easy for me because I understand exactly what I want out of life in this situation. And the situation I was living in for the last year, I could not figure out how do I change it in a way that doesn't fuck up more than it fixes, you know? And ultimately, the answer was kind of just wait it out. Sometimes that is the answer. Here's a big piece of advice I'm going to give you right away. Listen to yourself. Listen to the things you say. When you make art, listen to it a bunch of times. Like, not just when you're creating it, listen to it again after you release it. Listen to it again after other people have talked about it. Listen to it a bunch of times because chances are you were talking to yourself more than anybody else anyways, and you need to hear what you were saying. I follow the advice from my music a lot. Particularly, there is a couple of lyrics I wrote. One in a song called Juiced Up, where I said, everything I write is like a boomerang. Throw it in the heat and catch it like it's just a cold thing. And this was in reference to the fact that I had predicted a bunch of things that I was going to do in my music without really knowing it, like without thinking of it that way, like just kind of making statements, and then in like a metaphorical sense, something would transpire that retroactively made me think, well, this must have been what I wanted because I said this in this song, you know? And so that's what I meant by that. Everything I write is like a boomerang line. I throw it in the heat because when my emotions are high is when I tend to be inspired and creative and I start saying things. And a lot of the time it's just like nonstop. Like I will sometimes just be on a kick of having ideas. The other day, like I couldn't bring myself to record anything because I just kept having ideas too quickly. So I just wrote down like 10 ideas, that eventually I'll get around to recording. And it could be that the next day I have no ideas. But if I have 10 ideas I've already written down and I, have the energy to work on something, chances are I can find a way towards one of those 10 ideas. And usually when I have an idea, it's all kind of there. And sometimes if it's not, it takes a lot more rumination. This video took some rumination. This was like, I read the email, I thought about what I might say as an email, then I thought about what I might say as a video, and then I kept elaborating, and eventually I was like, this is going to be a long video. And, then it was, okay, well now if it's going to be a long video, that means I have to have the energy to do it. That means it has to be good. That means it has to be worth having done, So matters can quickly get complicated, but again, the question is, what are you trying to accomplish with the video? And since what I'm trying to accomplish here is kind of major, I'm really trying to save a lot of people a lot of time, and it does benefit me also. I will get to that later as well. The other lyric that I've been following was one I wrote last summer, I guess. I think I wrote it in the summer, but the lyric was, I don't remember the full bar, but it's something like, rake cheddar, don't spend, just weather this era, expand after winter's end. I didn't really do a good job throughout the winter of raking cheddar or not spending, but I did weather the era and not try to expand, because my tendency is always to try to expand. I'm always thinking, well, how do I make this even bigger? How do I grow this? And that's not a good thing. That is not necessarily a good instinct unless you are really good at planning, unless you really understand what expanding means. Expanding is not always good. You don't always want more. You want better. You want a better experience. You don't necessarily want as much experience as possible. You don't want everything everywhere all of the time. It sucks, everything everywhere all at once, even the movie. There's a lot of modern media about this. I think you probably understand. You don't want to be all things to all people. You don't want to have to consume every idea that's ever existed in history. Your mind can't handle it. There ain't room in there. So I think it's important to focus on who you are and what you care about. Where are you? What do you do? What do you like? What do you want? What do you want? That is like the most important question to come out of practical creativity. You're using your creativity to get what you want. And that can mean a lot of different things. And it's really underrated how much that matters, because a lot of people look at creativity only in terms of like whatever is the main product. Like, people don't look at art as a process, they look at it as a product, or a series of products rather. And that is a totally mistaken mindset. If you're an artist, disregard the end product idea, because that's not real. When does the product end? When does the experience of the art end? We're still talking about art that came out hundreds of years ago. We're still talking about art from people who are dead. Long dead. The artistic process is eternal. It's something that started before you, it's now passing through you, it will now pass on past you. So if you're just thinking about the individual piece, you're thinking too much about what it's going to do in the short term. You're thinking too much about like, how will people react to it in the short term? And it could be that you want those reactions, and that I'm not saying like, oh, you should not like create any art and release it or anything like that. I realize I'm sounding a little bit obtuse, but hopefully if I break this down enough, it'll make sense for you. In my video, Sympathy for Digibro Fans, I asked the question of the people who considered themselves to be like basically the same person as Digibro, except that Digibro could make money doing the same things they were doing. If all you wanted was to live the same lifestyle but have money, what were you planning to do with the money? Because the Digibro lifestyle was easily, it was not hard to sustain. You know, it didn't take like a lot of money to live that lifestyle. And so if the idea is like, oh, well, I'm willing to just kind of scrape by on minimum wage if it means that I get to watch anime and write about it as a career, and you really are like, that's what I want out of life, um, you know, you don't even need as much money as Digibro was making at the height. Digibro didn't know what to do with the money and wasted it. So, like, because he didn't know what to do with it, I would know. I would know what to do with it, unfortunately, which is just not spend it for the most part, because I don't really have ideas that cost money. I don't tend to think, other than like to decorate this space, right? Like if I had, let's say I had $1,000 right now, I would like immediately buy some tapestries just to put over these stretches of the wall. And it's not for the sake of the video or whatever, it's for the sake of just the pleasantness of my own experience, but I also know it will translate to the video, and you know, once it's in a video, it's a tax write-off. But it's just like, that's the level of spending I think about. It's like, what kind of nice things can I have that are cheap? You know, like I don't want it to be like fancy or expensive. I want it to be purple, you know, or have like a cool pattern on it. I'm sure I can find these things for less than, you know, like $30 tops, you know, at a some hippie store in down by the beach or whatever. So my goals are low rent. They don't cost much. And when I was first getting into being a creator, I thought that like you have to prove something. You know, like I thought I had to prove that I'm some kind of exceptional genius or something, so that someone up above me is going to come down and lift me up to where they are. And that's just not how it works. You pull yourself up. You pull other people into your radius and you tell them what you want from them, and then they either do it or they leave, you know? I listen to a lot of artists. This is a big part of how I've learned a lot of what I know about how other people operate, because I listen to lots and lots of interviews. I watch lots of content where people talk about their place in the industry. And what the people I've learned the most from are musicians, because people who are like animators, for instance, they tend to have very little like voting power in the world of what they're doing unless they just unfathomably bust their ass. Like ultimately a producer will let you like get away with more if you are willing to just personally hand animate all of it. If they're like, as long as I don't have to hire a second animator, you know, this thing gets to exist. So if you're somebody who's just fucking dedicated to making this animation at a level that is persuasive, you can make that happen. But in a lot of industries, the people on the creative end have way more sway over particularly one another. Where, for instance, I as a rapper have a pretty easy time getting producers to work with me. If I like a producer, if I like their work, like it's very easy for me to hit them up, because they know that most people don't want to listen to instrumental hip hop music. It's just not a popular genre. And also, they might, you know, just enjoy the way I rap. I mean, I mostly work with producers who also like my music, so that helps as well. But like, it's it's like if you are trying to get your name out there, it seems obvious to pair up with somebody who's bigger than you. The film world also and video world work more like this than the animation world as well, where again, it's so top down in that world that it feels like while there is a lot of individual expression, it almost always comes at the cost of like health and sanity, and it only comes from like hyper dedicated, overworked animators. And it's not that I don't respect those people. I respect those people tremendously, but the industry controlling them just is sapping the life out of them. And it makes it really hard for me to want to support any of it. Whereas there are some of those people, some people who have figured out how to be independent animators. I've got a few independent animation studio references around me, including on my shirt. These are people who figured out how to market their work in such a way that allows them to do what they want without being a part of someone else's paradigm. Now, they are still part of the paradigm of reality and how people within a capitalist system think. And that's a big part of what we're going to have to get into to break down the career mentality. But before you think about any of that, before you think about capitalism, or before you think about marketing, before you think about how do I get more popular, again, none of that matters nearly as much as what are you trying to do? What is your goal? You're not trying to become rich. You're probably not trying to become famous. You're trying to express yourself freely, and you're trying to feel like you are allowed to live. Like those are the first couple steps. And then from there, maybe you want to be able to travel. Maybe you want to be able to perform at conventions. Maybe you want to be able to perform on stages, or, to do meetups. Maybe you want to be able to, I don't know, work on a set or work in a booth or whatever the hell your goal is. Figure that part out first, because all of the time you spend that isn't in service of getting what you want is getting you farther from what you want, until a point where it will be harder to get what you want later. If all I really wanted was like to be a girl, spending 14 years not noticing that got me way farther from it than if I had been doing estrogen the whole time. I would be a totally different person by this point. Now, I'm not sitting around like lamenting not having become a different person, because what the fuck is the point? I can't even imagine what that world is like. I could have been such a different person that reality is a different place, but I'm in the reality I'm in now. Now, where I think a lot of people, including me as a young person, run into issues is with the disconnect between what you think you want and what you are actually going to be happy with. Because, again, people tend to think of art in terms of product instead of process. And if you're thinking about art in terms of product, you tend to think of it in terms of, I want to have written a book. I want to have made a movie. I want to have, inspired something. I want to have seen the effects of my influence, which is an important one. But when you focus on the product, you're not focusing on how did that get there? What did you have to do to make that happen? And if you don't know that process, investigating that is the first and most important thing. Like, if you want to write a book and you've never done it, and you've never heard someone talk about how they did it, go listen to people talk about how they wrote a book. Because you might think it just seems obvious, but if it was so obvious, everyone would be doing it all the time. People who want to do it would just do it. There wouldn't be like hundreds of thousands of people thinking that they would like to have written a book and not having done it. It's actually really fucking hard. I've done it a couple times. I haven't done it anywhere near as many times as I think I should have been able to do it. I think I should have been able to have written 30, 40, 50 books by now, given the speed I write at when I write. But it's rare that I can write a book, like a fiction novel. you know? And that has entirely to do with all kinds of personal hangups I have, but mostly it has to do with writing fiction is a pain in the ass, and it's not like fun a lot of the time. And it's, again, it's one of those things where I like the idea of having made a fictional story, and I have tons of ideas pertaining to stories, but my ideas are not an entire written novel. You know, my ideas are like an image of a character in my mind, or a scene, or like a description of the events of this character's life. They are not the whole fucking thing, you know? When you go to write, you have to then write the whole fucking thing, all of it. You have to keep writing until it feels complete. And then you have to do all kinds of other stuff to make other people care about it, if that's part of the goal too. Like, if your goal is not just to write a book, but to, in fact, to have a career writing books, that opens up a whole other can of worms. And then you have to look into, well, how do I do that? You know, because that's, again, it's not the same thing as how do I write a book. You can learn how to write a book. How do I release a book? How do I market a book? How do I deal with the fallout of having written a book? You know, you need to know all that stuff. Like, and it's not that you can't just learn it through having it happen to you, but hearing what other people have to say will make it much clearer to you whether or not you even want to write a book. You'll be like, maybe I don't want to write a book. Or you'll think, you know what, this actually invigorated me, because even though, like, now I understand what I don't want to do, now I understand where the problems are, so I just got to dodge that stuff and copy the stuff that works, you know, listen to the authors who are loving life, you know, still, and try to be more like them and less like the people who, despite their talents, maybe tripped up in this way or that. Like, you know, again, listen to lots of advice, but and it's not that you shouldn't be doing it at the same time. I'm not saying, like, don't charge in and don't make any of your own mistakes, but you will save a lot of time if you listen to other people's mistakes first, and again, just actually figure out what's the process of the thing you're trying to do. So, for instance, ever since I was a kid, I wanted to be in a band or like a musician. That was one of the first earliest dreams I had. And when I was a little kid, I wanted to like play guitar and sing. I wanted to make music that sounds like Linkin Park. You know, like I wanted to be like Chester and play guitar kind of thing. And so fairly early on, my parents got me like a cheap, you know, learner's guitar kit, and because they were excited at the idea, you know, of me becoming a musician. But I was totally overwhelmed by the actuality of what playing a guitar is like. I didn't understand it at all. I just didn't, like, I hadn't ever considered what it is, like what it means to play guitar. What does the guitar do? So as a kid, I was just like totally bewildered by it. And at one point, you know, like I think I'd had it for like a year and a half maybe before, you know, we tried getting me through lessons. And like I took a few of them, and the main thing is like you're meant to, you know, practice at home. And so he would show me how the chords work, and I had such I still do have tiny hands. I keep noticing that as I'm like, wow, my fucking hands look small. But like, you know, my hands were really small to be playing this guitar, and I didn't really understand the chords, and it felt like a strain, and I didn't want to practice because it sucked, you know, like kind of playing guitar kind of sucked. And so I've never picked it up. You know, every time I've tried, like the guitar has been around in the house, and I every once in a while will try. I do actually enjoy playing the bass guitar, because the bass guitar is mostly just fucking slap the thing, and you only got to press a couple notes, and you just keep doing this a whole lot, you know? It's not like hard to wrap your head around, and it makes great noise. And I'm easily amused by sounds. So, you know, I don't need much more than just like a low bass tone, like a repetitive bass tone, to be like, all right, cool, I'm jamming. But mostly I like to sing, and I like to use my voice. And practicing singing is something that requires you to have the space and people around you with the, if there are people around you, with the patience to listen to you sing, especially badly. Because in any art form, assumably, even if you have like a pretty decent amount of talent, you're going to get better. So no matter what, your early work is going to, at least in your mind, be bad. And badly singing in front of people, especially who don't want to hear you badly sing, is excruciating, or just not possible. They'll just, you just get shut up every time and then you don't get to do it. For me, I quickly realized in my early 20s that people liked hearing me rap. They did not like to hear me sing very much. I think mostly because of the way I like to sing, but like the way I liked to rap, people just enjoyed. So I leaned in on that, and like as a rapper, I learned a lot about how there are so many different aspects of what it means to be a rapper as a career. Because rapping as something you just do for fun, tons of people do it. Tons and tons of people do it extremely well. There are random motherfuckers you can meet that can freestyle better than lots of mainstream commercial rappers. What they do not know how to do is perform into a microphone. What they do not know how to do is studio etiquette. What they do not know is anybody who knows how to actually operate the buttons in the studio. They do not have the money to pay someone who does know those things. They don't know any producers. They don't understand music theory. They don't know how to match their voice to the beat. They don't know beat selection. They don't know, any aspect of the productions, like post-recording. You've then got to do the mixing, the mastering. I know nothing about mastering. The biggest problem with my music, in my mind at least, it's unmastered, and that is something that is immediately obvious, but also impossible to identify unless you literally know how to do it. Like, almost nobody knows what mastering is, which is why it's such a rare job, but everyone can tell when they're listening to unmastered music. They just think it sounds like shit, And like, I don't even know, I know nothing of the process, but it's something that any rapper with any degree of success, someone is mastering their records. They might not even be mastering them well. Someone is mastering the records. Whether they're doing it themselves, like JPEG Mafia, who literally does every part of this process by himself. The reason JPEG Mafia is considered a genius is that he collects all the samples. He literally sits at his computer all day, and when he hears neat noises, he records them. And then later, he arranges those neat noises, and he manipulates them, and he elaborately lays note for note into a track, which almost no other producer does. Most of them are just taking samples, creating a specific way of chopping that sample, manipulating the sound of it, and then, doing the same thing with drums. He's like literally note for note creating a whole song and rapping on it himself, recording it himself, mixing and mastering it himself. And the reason he does all that is simply trust issues. He doesn't think anybody else can do it without fucking up his vision of the song. Every time he would send something off to somebody else, like originally he was a producer, didn't like the way people use his beats, so he starts rapping. Doesn't like the other way other people mix, don't like the other. Eventually he's doing it all. If you can do it all well, awesome. But probably parts of that process you don't like. Whether you know how to do it or not, the reason I've never learned how to master is I fucking don't care. Like, I don't want to. I don't want to do it. Like, if I have to do that to make my music more popular, I don't want the music to be more popular. I just don't want to have to learn that, and I don't want to have to pay for it either. So that's just like me putting a limit on my own music in terms of its reach, but it's also kind of drawing a personal boundary and like trying to identify, what am I trying to do with this music? Because is the goal of it to have the most listeners or even the best listener experience? Not really. And with my music, I've had to investigate it a lot because right from the beginning, it was off putting even to myself. You know, that the fact that I don't know how to mix it and master it and don't know, understand the recording process, I didn't know what I was doing wrong. So for a long time, I'm just like, my music sounds like shit and I don't really understand why, you know? And I'm trying to compensate for everything with just getting better at my voice. You know, like I'm trying to compensate for how the recording process is, and on some level you can do that. You can make the best of a bad situation. I'm a big fan of Studio Shaft, you know, the animation studio that usually does it is understaffed and under budget, but they use very unique shot compositions and color design and character design work to make their show stand out even when it's like barely animated, you know? That's the approach I've always taken, is like, if I can't figure out how to make it professional, at the very least, I'll make it so distinct that it still functions as art. You know, whether it functions as product or not, it will still function as art because I'm putting all of my emotion into it. I'm making sure that the message comes across and that the story is told regardlessly of whether I have to learn how to fucking master a song just to be able to tell a story I'm trying to tell when I'm feeling emotional, you know? And I want the response right then. Like, even though most of my music doesn't really get much of a response, like, at the very least, I want to be able to, like, strike while the iron is hot emotionally. You know, I'm not going to care about this thing I said 6 months from now when I'm on to another thing. You know, I'm trying to say something new. I want it to exist. And if I have to wait through, you know, all these extra steps of people who are going to master it and mix it, at some point I'm going to be so emotionally disconnected from the thing that if it does blow up later and become popular, I now have to like decide I like that again. You know, that like I want to be that person I was 6 months ago and I wrote that song in perpetuity. And so like when you're at that level of consideration, like if you really were working for a major label, this is why artists don't release most of their stuff. Like, from the fan perspective, there's kind of always this craving of like, well, why not just give me all of it? At the least slide me the B-sides on like a side disc or something, you know? But it's that if one of those songs that maybe the artist doesn't really even love becomes super popular or is what the label decides to push, they're stuck with it, you know? So it's like you do have to kind of be careful with your art. You don't want to be the cherry pie guy. This is a famous story of you know, the dude who wrote, I can't even remember the name of the fucking band. The guy was tormented by the fact that their one big hit was the song Cherry Pie, which he hated and was nothing like the rest of their music, but it became his entire identity. And you know, he eventually committed suicide by drugs and alcohol, but he just like couldn't live down being the cherry pie guy. Don't let that be you, you know? I've got certain things that I've said that certain people don't want me to live down. And I guess it's no, it's not fair. What the fuck? I've already apologized for everything I've ever said. So, uh, well, you know, I guess they got to make sure I always remember to keep apologizing. I guess what I'm trying to say is remember, you'll be held accountable by society for whatever you create and do. Even though I was putting out my rap music without really even intending for it to be like a great audience experience necessarily, I always had it in my head that I would be able to do it live. That like I never thought I'd be like performing in a normal context, like a normal rap show. I always figured that it would be if I gathered my fans together, I could perform for them. You know, like if my music got big enough, I would just do a show that's just me and people affiliated with me and my fans. And it would be more like a, you know, meet and greet type of a thing rather than performing like a traditional show, just because I didn't think of myself as existing inside of that industry in that sense. Well, when I met Riley, he was somebody who had just helped with an entire rap tour. He had been part of booking the shows, part of getting people promoted and everything, just like making things happen. Whatever needed to be done for the tour, he was like basically a gopher. So he explicitly knew what it would take for me to go and be able to perform in the rap world, like realistically. And so, he put the opportunity in front of me. I ended up performing, like opening two different shows in Elko, Nevada, because that's just like kind of where he spent high school. So he knew a lot of people there. He knew the people who owned the venues, and it was, pretty easy to organize getting me to be able to perform there. And in the process of that, I carefully watched how everyone else moves, and I also ended up interviewing like most of the rappers, not only the local ones, but guys from out of town who were in town. I interviewed Spice One, I interviewed Twistello, I interviewed just a ton of like local Elko rappers. I'm sorry for not remembering everybody's names, but I did interview like 15 guys, and I got a strong sense of what everyone's goals were, why they were doing this, what was holding some of them up, and also like why some of them weren't really trying for more, because this was what they wanted. Like they already had it. This was the goal. For some people, it's a way to sell drugs. Like you get on stage, you tell everybody you sell drugs, and then you sell them drugs. Someone is selling the drugs at the show. So there's that aspect. Then there's the doing drugs. Some people get on stage, talk about how much they love doing drugs, and then someone brings them drugs and they do the drugs. Sometimes it's about, who am I going to have sex with? You rap about the type of person that you want to have sex with. That type of person then fucks you after the show. For some people, it's about career moves or respect. It's about, do people think that I'm a good rapper here in Elko, in this community where we're competitive, where we're all kind of trying to be the best in this little town? Can I get that respect? Will people, remember my performance? Will I get laid tonight? Will someone buy me a drink? Will I get compliments? Will I get blowback? What kind of criticism are people going to have for me? Like, all of these things are in all these people's minds. I learned a bunch of important lessons just getting prepared for these shows, because the first time we went to Elko was not for one of my performances. It was for the Spice One show where I interviewed a lot of the rappers, including him. I got the chance to use the stage before the show to practice some of my own songs and do a little recording of them. And when I was trying to pick what songs would I perform, I realized quickly most of my music would not survive in a live context. A lot of it was stuff that had like bars I just don't agree with anymore, because this was after I had transitioned. And also that I didn't know the lyrics as well as I thought I did. Like some of the songs I did think would be good to perform, I knew a lot of the lyrics, but I had never like practiced them actively with the intention of performing them. I kind of thought I knew them. But then when I was actually trying to do it, I was like, oh shit, if I have to do this without backing vocal, I'm fucked. I don't know these words. So I had to, those three songs that I did on stage, I had to really practice them beforehand. I did multiple takes, and I flubbed in a few places, because the energy when you're on stage, even when no one's there, is different, because you have to account for like the delay in, the microphone. You have to account for just being in like a place that's not like your room, where you're singing by yourself. Like all aspects of it are part of the experience, and are either something that you're going to love about it or going to hate about it. And so, when I actually did my shows, I had created some songs just for the sake of the shows, reworked some of my songs into stuff that would work live, and I had a 5-song set for each one. I think I changed a song or two in between them, the two shows that I did. And they both went well. They went over well, but also they made me realize why I had wanted to do a show apart from the rap scene, which is that if my fans were there, obviously they'd have a great time because they know my music and they already like me. I'm trying to make fans essentially by performing here. And there's not really a way to do that because in this local rap scene, most of these people know each other. Most of this is about having an excuse for these people to come together. You know, some of them do have ideations of moving on to like bigger and better things, but the ones who do, they literally leave Elko. There's no opportunity in Elko. Reno, which is like 4 hours away, or Las Vegas, which is like 6 hours away, are cities with some level of opportunity for a rapper, to make a living. You cannot make a living rapping in Elko. It's the middle of nowhere. There's nothing there. It's just not feasible unless you were like a major internet sensation, and that's totally kind of luck based or based on, you'd have to fly to LA and work with LA people on how you're going to make that happen, like Doechii did. So if I wanted to move through the lanes of hip hop, like it would have kind of come down to like popularity, right? Like my performances made people curious about me. It made people like, oh, okay, you can clearly rap. You have some interesting songs. Who are you? What's your deal? And when it came to that part, I was like, actually, I don't really know, because I was like, well, this is my first time doing this. I don't really know if this is something I want to keep doing, because performing to people who don't know your music is fine, but it's not like electrifying. It feels desperate. It feels like you're desperately trying to get these people to pay attention to you, and like they're just barely amused at something you're giving your fucking soul to. And like I understand why it's so difficult for people to stay in that industry, because it's easy to just like make a song in your room, release it to the internet, nobody cares, and you move on. It is not easy to decide, no, people have to care. People have to care because I want to be able to do this on stage all the time. And I want to see people reacting to my music. I want to see them shouting my lyrics back at me. That takes work. That takes going out on stage and talking to people who don't care all the time. And it doesn't just take work in the artistry, but also in like being a person who those people want to see succeed. And that's a super underrated part of all of this, is that people are not really going to help you succeed if they don't want to see you succeed. And that doesn't necessarily mean like being a good person. Lots of people don't want to be good people. They don't want to be tasked to that, and they view someone who acts like a good person as someone who is tasking them to do extra work. So a lot of people look up to villains, or look up to somebody who seems to be cheating the system in some way. But if nobody looks up to you, then it's really hard to get a room full of people to want to listen to what you're saying and repeat it back to you. Like you have to be a vibe people want to catch on. So even though I do think people were vibing with my performance to an extent, again, it was a curiosity. They don't know who I am. They don't know what my deal is. They're worried. They're concerned. They need to be, reassured. And I wasn't going to be there to offer that reassurance. I don't live in Elko. I wasn't really planning to keep going back, unless we had more opportunities there, which we didn't. So it was kind of like a two and done, just little excursion, but it gave me a ton of insight into why would I want to be a rapper? Why would I want to tour and do these kinds of things? Because I saw the kinds of people that are at the shows and what the people who are performing are getting out of the shows. And ultimately, I don't feel like I am any of those people. I don't, I'm not interested in like the lifestyle that I saw there, the way I thought I would be. And I wouldn't even say I'm not interested. I thought it was cool. It was like a cool atmosphere to hang around, but it wasn't my world. It wasn't where I come from. It's not where I feel safe. It's more like Hunter Thompson joining the fucking Hells Angels, like somebody who is clearly like a soft journalist, hanging out for the sake of understanding what's going on, but who ultimately will get my ass beat if I really try to be a part of this, if I blow up the spot for these people. But I ended up being inspired all over again when I went to Too Many Games, because I have always enjoyed doing convention performances, convention panels. I've done a few of them. They've always gone extremely well. And it was always an environment where everyone in the crowd knew who I was. So they're giving me their undivided attention just because they see me as like a celebrity and they know something about me. They're already invested in my narrative. And the ones who aren't, they get swept up in the, how interested everybody else is. And those people are telling them all my lore and that kind of shit. And so they get up to speed and they end up interested in me. And so all of the panels I've ever done either made people like who already knew me like me more, or people who had never heard of me like me for the first time. Always thought it would be a good idea for me to do more of them, but the problem is, how do you justify something like that? Like, how do you what makes you somebody who can give a panel at a convention? My favorite convention panelist, I don't know if they're still using this name, Charles Dunbar. I haven't found what their internet presence is currently. I can't figure out what happened to Dunbar, but they used to, at the very least, give like up to 5 panels per convention and basically travel all summer con to con, getting paid to be a presenter. And I don't think that they were making like incredible money or anything at it, but it seemed like a really fun lifestyle where there's lots of travel. You're always talking, on stages and giving these impassioned rants. And, it felt a lot like watching my analysis videos, but on a stage. Um, I even wrote some analysis videos inspired by some of the stuff that Charles talked about. But I don't have the research background that Charles Dunbar has. I am a gonzo journalist. I write about my experiences as a part of culture. I explore culture through a holistic lens of just all of it. I didn't like go to university. I don't have a background in study. I don't have any particular field of study where I'm a master of. So when it comes to giving presentations at panels, it's like I would basically have to learn something to be able to present about it, unless the subject is me, which it usually was at all the other panels I've given. But to justify that, I had to be somebody. Like the fact that I had like this kind of success in my YouTube career was leading to people inviting me to conventions, to me being able to throw my weight around and say, you should make me a, press, or you should let me in for free. Even conventions I didn't go to as a panelist, I still got in for free just by saying that I'm a member of the press and making a video about it afterwards. So, not having that clout that lets me just like walk through the door like that, what is my reason for being able to live that life as a panelist? That's what I started struggling with, and also feeling like I don't know that there is something I want to study that much, that it like, what do I even feel passionate enough about to feel like I'm going to dedicate myself to giving that panel over and over and over again at all these different cons? Because that's usually the case. Like, usually these people are giving the same couple panels at a bunch of conventions, so that means they really care about the subject matter. Charles Dunbar on Kill La Kill or Persona, you could have asked them to give that rundown outside of the convention and it would have just happened. It's the fact that you can't shut up about something that makes you want to do a whole thing on it. And I've never had like one thing I can't shut up about. I just can't shut up. That's my thing. I can't stop talking, and reducing that down to something explainable or like saleable, that's been the difficult part for me. So I've been trying to figure out like, okay, well, how do I take the natural tendency I have to just always be making shit and make that sustainable? And that's what my whole career has been about lately. The whole last year has been, really the last few years, ever since my retirement, the question has been, how do I make this sustainable? Okay, so to sort of recenter the discussion here, in the service of figuring out what do I want and like figuring out if you really want it, I guess the best question to ask is what would make this unsustainable for me, if anything? What that has made this unsustainable for other people would apply to me, or what that is making this sustainable for somebody else doesn't apply to me. If you're trying to be just like someone else, but then you hear something about their life that you think, well, I don't want to have to do that. Well, you have to do everything that person is doing to be that person. If you're planning to do something different, you're now going in a different direction. And whether that's like pretty close to the same direction they're going or not, it can be hard to predict what is actually necessary to do what someone is doing. Like, for instance, if you are on a record label, they will literally go to a level of telling you to remove certain lyrics from your songs if they don't like it. You know, like if they say, we'll let you do this song, but only if you pull this lyric out. And now you have to decide, like, do I want the song to come out or not? And, like, you need a certain number of songs. Like, you have to have a song. Am I going to pick this one and change it because the label wants me to? You could fight the label. You could try. Sometimes you fight the law and the law wins. But I think that you always have to have a lot of conviction in what you're doing, and you have to have a lot of resolve. You have to have the resolve to see through whatever you're doing absolutely in defiance of all opposition. And sometimes the opposition won't be that bad, and sometimes the opposition will be really bad, depending on what you're trying to do. And sometimes the opposition will be the reason you don't want to do it. It's actually what scares most people out of being creatives is the reactions from other people. I tend to focus more on the reactions from myself because I've had to deal with myself so much as like the first line of attack. But that's only because the people around me that I grew up with were already so aggressive, you know? So I just come from a place of viewing things negatively, and that's something that I don't like. And so it's something I've changed about myself, and that makes it even more difficult for me to be, sort of around people who are in that negative mentality. But there is a certain level on which you probably have things that you do that you just know beyond a shadow of a doubt you should be doing. You should be allowed to do. You know it is good for you, and you know that the people around you either have to let you do this or they truly don't care about you. And if you can communicate to them, that's very important. That like either you're going to let me do this or you are showing me that you don't care about me. And if that's the case, you have to now be enemies. And that could be really hard for you. That could mean your life gets a lot more difficult. If, say, you live at home with your parents and you decide to make them your enemies, they might kick you out of the house. I'd take my chances. And I say that knowing how privileged that sounds. But when I say I take my chances, what I mean is like there's a whole wide world out there of, people who see things very differently, and when you're around people whose mentality like is like wrong or harmful, or at the very like to you, whether it is to the world or not, like for you being around these people is hurting you. When you stop being around those people, and even more so when you start being around people who you actually like and who do good things for you, it makes going back so much harder and so much more of something you're going to avoid. Like you will do anything to not get back into that position, especially if you have fallen into it more than once. If you find yourself you keep finding yourself around like abusive people, and then finding yourself not around them anymore, and then you're kind of like, what the fuck, like how do they live like that, and then you hang out with people who are like accepting, and it just makes your world feel more open. You know, like if you're with people who are on the same page as you, and it doesn't feel like you're constantly fighting the resistance of both yourself and this other person and the world outside, you know, the less barriers there are towards you doing whatever you're trying to do will just make it easier to get done. And on some level, again, if you can really put the screws on people, like, you can make it happen. And again, I look to musicians because every musician I've ever seen who wasn't successful lacked that stick-to-itiveness. And when I say not successful, I don't mean not famous or not rich. When I was talking about those rappers and stuff, like, the ones who are touring because they're making money, you know, like, doesn't matter how much money. It doesn't matter. Like, they're living the lifestyle they're looking for. They get to play shows, they get to make money, they get to hang out, they get to do the things they like to do. You know, that's a great life. You don't need more than that if that's the goal. And a lot of the guys who were under those guys don't understand that, because they're not looking at it like, this show tonight is where I want to be. They're looking at it like, I want to be at some other show in LA. Go to fucking LA then. You can't be in Elko if being in Elko is not your goal. You know, Spice One wanted to be in Elko that night. Had a great time. You know, like, the people who were who took it as like, this is what my life is and this is, I'm going to enjoy my life, are having a great time. If you are of the mentality that, like, I'm doing this because it's a stepping stone towards something else, do the something else. Like, what is stopping you? You know, and the answer is probably, I don't know enough, or I'm not confident enough. And you're usually not confident enough because you don't know enough. If you knew how to, if say you, you know, like, walk onto a movie set and they're like, who the fuck are you? And you're like, I'm the third grip. And then you do all the things a third grip does, and nobody's going to question that. You know, like, at some point somebody might be like, was that guy actually hired by us? Or, like, is he just a third grip who walked onto the stage? You know, like, they might have to, for legal reasons, you know, create a conversation with you. But, like, my point is that that's how you end up being the third grip, is like, you know how to do it and you're there. And so if you want to learn how to do things, you have to be around those things. You will never learn how to do it not being around it. My brother Victor is a cinematographer. I wanted to be a film director when I was in high school. That was another one of my big dreams that I had no idea what it really amounts to. Because in my mind, directing a film meant, like, shooting film. Like, you're telling someone what to do and then you're filming them doing it, you know? Which, on a very low level, yes, can be what filmmaking is. Plenty of great indie films have been made with not much more than that. But I didn't know fucking anything about cameras. I didn't know anything about shot compositions. I didn't know anything about lighting. I didn't know anything about writing a script, acting, directing. I didn't know anything. I thought I just needed to write a movie and shoot it. And on some level, I was not wrong about that. But I didn't write a movie I could shoot. You have to write a movie you can shoot. I could write a movie I could shoot now, because I know how this fucking camera works. That's how I got this shot. I was like, okay, based on how the phone camera looks, like, and how the room looks, I can get this cool symmetry. I can put all my stuffed animals, you know. I know about the width of the camera, so I know where everybody's going to be visible. Like, this is me filmmaking. Very low level. But, like, my brother went to school because he didn't know how to find his way onto a film set. He didn't know anybody in the film world. He didn't know anything. He'd never seen any interviews, didn't know any terminology, didn't know anything about film. He was a theater kid in his last years of high school, and me and my cousin, our cousin Boyd, you know, were interested in being directors, so he took an interest in that. But when he actually went through the course, he realized what each of these jobs is. What is a director? My brother Victor doesn't like telling people what to do. So he's not really a director archetype. He's done it though because people do trust him, and he knows the people in the film scene. There are people who will just listen to him without really much effort. It doesn't take like proving anything because they already know him. They already know he can do it. And he gives them a good script and says, this is how we're going to do it. And they go, all right, I'm in. You know, like, you don't have to be like a strong arm necessarily to get things done. It can help though. When I keep saying like I look to musicians for inspiration, I keep thinking of Doechii because she's someone who obviously has made it so far so fast, especially lately, by just being ferocious, like being like really aggressive about like, this is what I want, who's going to help me make it happen, show of hands, nobody in this room, I'm going to the next room, show of hands, you're in, come with me, like, here's the plan, can you do that? You can? All right, like, meet me at rehearsal. And that is directing. She is an amazing director. She literally directed like the Conan segment, in the sense that like she came up with the dance and told them what to do. She's the one who comes up with all the costuming, all the concepts. And I'll say also, like, that is something I think I actually do kind of well, but it's a matter of knowing what are you asking of these people. I'm good at asking someone to do something if I know what it is. And when I've tried to direct Victor, like a lot of the music videos we've shot together, they were hard to do because I would always be asking him, like, please just come up with something, just whatever you've got. And he's like, I don't really have ideas when it comes to your music. I always just imagine like insane anime shit. So like sometimes he would have like, I want to do this cool camera gimmick. So a lot of my music videos are just like, he had a cool camera gimmick and it's me rapping and him doing that camera gimmick. But like when I would have ideas, I would pitch them to him and he's just like, that's not possible. Like, you don't understand. I can't light that. Or like, it's not going to look right. Or you don't have the right background elements, like I just had so little understanding of what is necessary to get the shots. So you can't direct somebody if you don't know what you're talking about. Again, I could direct a film shot with this camera, that I wrote and starring people I know. Just now my camera filled up and I took the opportunity while I was transferring footage to figure out where I really want to go with the rest of this rant. And I want to broaden the scope out a bit because I feel like I've now talked about how to figure out what you want, how to figure out if you don't really want that. Now I'm going to talk about how to do practical creativity. Like, let's say that you're not so much concerned about like what you do or how you do it, but like, why am I doing it? What am I doing it for? How do I use it practically? Like, what should I do with this thing I've got? That was my ghetto solution for a tripod giving out on me. I'm sure I have the tools to do this properly somewhere on this earth. First, I'm going to say that creativity starts from imagination. And imagination starts from, I'm going to say, discomfort, but it might be more accurate to say the impression that you could be more comfortable than you are. Not necessarily that you have to be totally uncomfortable, but just thinking, there's something I can do to make things a little bit easier for myself. When I say comfortable, I do kind of mean like literally cozy and comfy, but also like just like less scary. Like, it makes life feel less daunting. It makes everything feel like just a little bit easier. And the human race has reached a level of comfort and convenience that is like, even being homeless is like tremendously easier than it used to be. You know, like it's almost impossible to describe how different the world is now. You know, there are some places where it's still like there's such a limitation of civilization that it really is like living in an older time. But again, if you are like even homeless, if you're in like a major American city, there's a lot of conveniences you can still take advantage of. A lot of the time, people's imagination is what creates their fear that compels them to action, right? So, like, if you are afraid of being homeless, imagining yourself becoming homeless is what compels you to try to avoid it. And so, your, your imagination becomes the creativity of what can I do to keep myself from being homeless. I've never been as afraid of being literally homeless in the sense that I don't know where home is. I've lived in like 30 different houses. In 2023, I pretty much lived in different hotels like every other week for, the whole year. I've, you know, been on tour around the country even when I was practically an infant, like a toddler. So I have a lot of experience with travel and with being on the move. I feel most comfortable on the move. There's a reason I pace around in some of my videos so much, or just like jostle, So I have a hard time feeling the sense of comfort in a place that, oh, this place is safe because it's home. And I feel an odd amount of that with this house just because this is where Vic and Hope had been living for like 5 years. So I am somewhat familiar with this house. It does feel homey. It feels like, familiar, but I've also already changed it so much. This was not a living space. It was arranged nothing like this, but now it feels like my room because I turned it into my room, in the way I would want it to be. And I'm sure I'll keep adapting it because these low ceilings are a fucking bitch. I've hit my head so many times already because I'm an idiot and I have a huge head. Now, when it comes to like making things more comfortable for yourself, that can mean tons of different things. If your basic needs feel met, oftentimes it's your social needs that are in need of more, especially if you're an artist. A lot of the times you are trying to fulfill a social need. You're trying to explore, why do you feel disconnected from other people, or why do you have such intense emotional reactions to other people? Maybe you're trying to, maybe like that you shouldn't feel the way you do, and so you kind of don't exert your feelings forwardly. You kind of clench them inwards and then they go into art somewhere else. Or it could be that you are in a constant state of artistic expression. I mentioned Dochi earlier. Kendrick Lamar is another good comparison. He talks a lot about how he loves being present. And so he's trying to do anything he can to keep himself feeling present in the present moment. And oftentimes, what makes you feel the most present is being creative, using your imagination. I think that when you start using your imagination, it can cause a disconnect. Like, you start imagining and then you start forgetting that you're in the real world because you're now thinking about the thing you're imagining. And I think that some people enjoy just kind of being in that imagination and then, just letting it go. Like, I have plenty of imaginations that I don't really care if they amount to anything. It's just like a flight of fancy. But that is kind of a waste of your imagination, a waste of time in a sense, if you are viewing the world as innately in need of comforting. And I do view the world that way because right now I feel pretty comfortable, but I know that that is privileged. Like, I am comfortable because, in this case, very specifically because of privilege. I'm privileged that my brother could let me live in this house for, I'm my other brother is going to live here too, and we're splitting the rent. So, like, I wouldn't have been able to afford a place for just me and Bird, but because I have two younger brothers who also work and that I have good relationships with, you know, we're able to create a communal solution. So in this sense, like even communistic things can also be I have the privilege of communism within my community, because um, I'm lucky with who my parents are and who my brothers are, and there's an aspect to which I contributed to this. Like in my attempt to figure out what is the best way to live, studied all these things, passed information down to my brothers, create helped to create the circumstance I live in, but I can't take credit. I don't really take credit for anything. I think everything. I forgot I was going to say this at the top of the episode. None of this is your fault. All creative people, none of this is your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault you're having imaginations. It's not your fault you want to create. So, even if it's something you think you shouldn't do, it's not your fault that you want to do it. The world put this in you, and you see so much imagination, you see so much creativity that it's a possibility, and you see how effective it can be. When I see something like Kendrick Lamar do the Super Bowl show, I have like this intense feeling of, is there anything I could do, that like would transpire a message on that level? Like, because in order for what he's saying to have an effect, in order for him to get the effect he wants, other people have to copy him. Like, he's kind of put it out there that, like, you're trying, like, I want people to be like me. And so I have to look at that and go, how do I be more like, fuck, how do I live up to that? And I listen to what he says, and he's like, well, I go for a run every morning and I talk to God. And I'm like, I can do a semblance of that. There's a version of that I could do. I feel more attuned to myself if I am in a like better physical condition. And that doesn't necessarily mean like working out or being strong, but it does mean keeping your chakras open. Like, and what I mean by chakras, your spine, your spinal column like relates to your whole body. And anytime you have any kind of hunch, the way I've been sitting in this video is that I'm kind of like keeping my back straight, but I'm sitting way up on my arm. So I'm trying to keep as much of my spine open as possible, because when part of it gets locked and then those muscles get sore, it feels like there's an inability for anything to pass through certain areas of your body. It feels like my mind is imagining what I should be able to do physically, and my body can't reproduce it because it's stuck. The chakra's jammed. And it's because if I sit like, how do I sit at a laptop? If I'm sitting like this, typing, and you can see this hunch here where it's creating this blockage in my shoulders. And now, if I think creatively, I should be able to do something like that. Did you hear that pop? Like, you can hear the popping in my shoulders because I don't regularly move my arms that way all the time, every day. I regularly am like this. And so, even if, again, imagination, creativity, I should be able to dance like a dancer, right? What is wrong with my body that it can't do what their bodies can do? Well, the answer starts in the chakras. I'm not doing enough to keep them open such that I would be able to do that kind of thing. But you have to listen to people who can do those things to understand that. If you listen to any dancer, they know yoga, they know chakra, they understand this. To somebody who doesn't understand it, they hear chakra and they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? Isn't that like some, I don't know. Literally, I don't know. They don't know. They don't know what it is, other than like something that happens in anime. Basically, what I'm trying to get at is that imagination and creativity start with a problem. It's either the problem that you're uncomfortable in some way, or if you have become comfortable, the problem of knowing you might become uncomfortable again. Like right now, I just said, I'm in a very comfortable position. There's a few uncomfortable things. It's very dusty in here, and so I've got kind of a sinus problem. I got to get that cleared up. I still have lots of stuff around I'd like to sort through. I have projects that, like, I have things I've imagined of, like, oh, here's what I'd like the space to be. And so I'm in the process of doing creativity on this house. I'm doing the creative process. I'm doing art. There is no, like, complete state for a house to be in. Some people, I guess, have like an endpoint and they're like, all right, house is done. Um, my family's never been like that. The house has always been a tremendous work in progress throughout my life, no matter what house it is. My mom's big into rearranging. My dad's big into building shit. My brother Victor is now into building shit, and I'm into rearranging. So it's the same stuff, turtles all the way down. I don't really know what Shade's tendency is yet, but I guess I'll find out when he lives here. So, in the sense that it begins with a problem, right? Like, you have to try to figure out, what problem am I trying to solve through this artistic creative process? And sometimes identifying the problem is the problem. Like for me, for a long time, the problem was I can't figure out what the fuck the problem is. The trans thing was staring me in the face, but I didn't have the terminology, I didn't have the community. I come from, what I have come to realize is a, like, uniquely homophobic part of America, and not because it's the South. Like, a lot of people think of Virginia as the South, and parts of it very much are the stereotypical South. Hampton Roads is a little bit of the South, but it's almost overwhelmingly the military. And the military is a very homophobic organization, a very gay organization, in the same way that, like, gangs and record labels are often, like, fronts for the ability of, gayness and um, other, unfortunately, things that shouldn't be like, some things should be acceptable, and there are people who feel insecure about them, so they end up running around with people who should feel insecure. Like with the Diddy case, like, a lot of people kind of conflate the gay part of it with the pedophile part of it, and it's like, it's the insecurity that drives these two things together. If you're not insecure about being gay, you don't view it as something to hide. You don't have to hang around in spaces with people who hide, like pedophiles. Diddy, though, that's a great example of a person who you can look at, and now that we know his story, you can figure out exactly what that guy was after. He wanted to be known as the freakiest man in the industry. He wanted everybody to know that he could do whatever he wanted, in like the sense that whatever you think you shouldn't be able to do, he can do that. He can be, you know, I'm not going to go a list of examples here. Anything that he thought he shouldn't be allowed to do, he went out of his way to do it. That's the goal. And in order to be able to do that requires a massive amount of power. And so everything he did was about amassing power. And if you were only looking at any one part of his career, any one individual product, you will totally miss the art of process of what he was trying to do. The rap never mattered. He didn't really write most of it. He just had he hired people to create songs that he did a bad job on. I always thought Diddy fucking sucked as a rapper because his voice sucks. He has no conviction. He has no emotion behind what he says. His beats that he was on are fine, but like he's like DJ Khaled practically. Like there's not much difference in what those two guys were doing or what their goals are. And in DJ Khaled's case, not to be the freakiest man alive necessarily. He seems at least a bit more noble, in like being just like a regular, I want to have a lot of money and flaunt it and put a lot of people on kind of a rich guy, which most of America respects that attitude. But Diddy was explicitly trying to use this as a way to be the freakiest man possible. And, guys like DJ Khaled, I'm not going to ultimately respect because all of them know what's going on. They know about this stuff happening and they're just letting it happen because it facilitates their ability to do what they also want to do, which, even if it's less freaky, is still just as opportunistic and ultimately gross because it perpetuates the system of abuse. This is why I've been so insistently anti-billionaire pretty much ever since the Epstein Island thing came out, because it really put into perspective for me why someone wants to be a billionaire. Like, what do you need billions of dollars for? What is the impetus? And I think there have been some people who just want to be, like, Jeff Bezos really reads to me as a guy who just wanted to be the richest man alive. You know, he just wanted to be the most successful businessman, and he kind of had a short reign in that regard, because it was like, make Amazon the most successful business ever. Okay, now I'm the world's richest man. But he's never tried to diversify and adapt to the changing meta of how power and money moves around in the way that Elon Musk has, or that even Ye has, where Ye can do this fucking insane thing where he goes from being a billionaire to being bankrupt inside of every year. And like, when you really look at the way Ye moves through the world, like, it will totally change your perspective on how careers work, how money works, how, like, whether or not cancellation's a real thing. Like, it's about, what do you want? When Ye wants something, he will stop at nothing to get it. When he wants billions of dollars, or access to, when he wants access to the idea of him having billions of dollars, he will make that happen. When he feels that he can't get what he wants with billions of dollars, he turns to other means. Ye is so anti-Semitic, obviously because some specific few Jewish people won't give him what he wants. And he's named names before. Like, he's gone as far as literally being like, hey, look, I'm really mad at these guys. But what can he do about it other than literally turn society against them? And he's failing at that. It can be that there are lots of solutions to problems that create more problems. And a lot of the difficulty I have in my creativity is navigating, is this going to solve more problems than it creates for me? And creating problems can come in many different forms. One problem is just, you have to spend time making something. So, is it worth the time you're going to invest? That's like the first problem that usually comes up. Then there's like, is this going to have the intended effect? Whether that means making you money, whether it means people reacting to it the way you hope that they will. And like, the closer it is to the heart, the more difficult and like more, considerate you'll have to be in creating your art. There's lots of stuff that, like, I know I have to deal with, a lot of baggage and trauma I have that pertains directly to specific people. And therapy is a solution, but therapy is very time consuming. It's like, you get an hour a week, you have to pay for it, like, it's the amount of decompression I have to do would take years and years. I'm a lot better at just ranting into a camera for an audience. But even if I could make literally just telling my personal story engaging for you, because I'm a good storyteller and I understand my own stories very well, I don't know if I can tell those stories without, like, damaging, those people or my relationships with some of them in ways that would, have more negatives than positives. Like, if I go and, like, diss one of my parents, for instance, like, they watch my videos sometimes. Like, if I'm sitting here like, yeah, and my dad said this to me when I was 12, and it's like, I could have said that to his face, but like, there are approaches you can take to work through what you're feeling that might not even, like, involve those people or have to really even mention them, because part of the point of creativity is finding creative, imaginative solutions to the problems. Like, I gotta work through my mental anguish, right? A lot of fiction writers and musicians and stuff are really so disconnected and so, like, dissociated from their emotions that they don't even really like register that they're doing therapy on themselves. Like there's artists like Kendrick or Doechii who are very explicitly like, yeah, artist therapy, that's what I'm doing it for. And like, but it always is. It's just sometimes it's not very effective, or people don't know how to use it effectively, or they don't really appreciate what they're saying through their art. They're not listening to themselves, or they're not putting thought into what they're saying or thinking about it afterwards. So you can easily not get much out of your art. Not get you can make a ton of money and not get what you're looking for out of your art. You can get what you're looking for and make no money out of your art. But I think the most practical way to be creative is to try and solve the problems that are causing you to feel the need to create, that are causing you to be imaginative. Even if the problem is just that you're bored. Like if life is perfectly comfortable, but there's nothing happening and you feel like something should be happening, that is enough for it to get your imagination running. You start imagining, what could I be doing? You start imagining, what could reality be? And then how do I translate that in a way that other people are going to understand? Like, whatever is the reason you are having imagination, creativity is how you solve for imagination, essentially. And often it springs more imagination and more creativity. And so if you love having imaginations and creativity, even if it is kind of literally identifying problems, solving problems is really satisfying. So, for me, a big part of my career, why I am capable of making content so often, is that as soon as the camera goes off, I'm just looking for the next problem to solve. What's the next effect I'm trying to have? What's the next conversation I'm trying to start? What's the next mental issue I'm trying to work through? What am I trying to make happen? What do I need out of this creativity? All right, lock in for this part because this is the most important wisdom, best game I'm about to drop on you. Humans are herd animals. That is incredibly important to understand. If you've never watched cows, I recommend it. One time I just stared at a large herd of cows for a very long time, and I felt I understood their whole community within about 15 minutes, because cows don't live super complicated lives. With humans, it would take a little longer, but if you stared at a community long enough, you will identify all of the same aspects of how a herd operates that you'd see in cows. Herd creatures have two concerns. One is, I need to have a place inside of the herd. And two is, the herd needs to have a place inside of the world. To a herd creature, they are inseparable from the herd. You are a part of it. You don't exist as an individual unit because you can't survive as an individual unit. Herds adapted to exist together. Humans adapted to exist together. We can survive alone, kind of, in the literal physical sense, but not in the sense that you would know how to do that if no one taught you. Nobody is born and learns survivalism, like at a level, that like TikTokers who are going out in the woods by themselves and living off of nothing. Those guys learned that from the internet. They learned it from other guys who do it. Information passed down through generations. Evolution. Humans evolved to be able to do these things by continually trying to do them, and whoever succeeded at certain things ended up passing down those genes that allowed them to be successful. Whatever traits allowed them to be successful, I mean to say. You get what I fucking mean. Both physical evolution and the evolution of ideas follow a similar kind of logic. Some stuff doesn't work, it gets forgotten about. Some stuff does work, and therefore it evolves. When I was a kid, I remember feeling that I was a part of my herd. My mom had always been around. My dad, he had been kind of in and out of my life, but I knew who he was. and like vaguely what he does, and like I had my younger brother Victor. I knew who various family members were, my dad's brothers, my mom's sisters, my mom's mom. Like, I knew who my family was, and I just naturally thought I'm a part of this family. I didn't have any questions about it as a little kid. The first show I remember being like a big fan of, first two shows, were Power Rangers and Beast Wars. And these are both shows that are about a small herd trying to protect themselves from a rival herd. And it's sort of pitched in a way that the herd that are the heroes, the reason they are the heroes is that their success would lead to success for the greater whole. Now, in the case of Beast Wars, it was pretty much just the Maximals and Predacons. There wasn't like a humanity at stake, but there was a lot of implication of like environmental damage and just like a general sense that if Megatron was in charge, life would be worse for everybody, whereas, Optimus would give you much more autonomy and just kind of not be a huge bully all the time. But ultimately, the show was about how these two herds function, one that works well and one that's dysfunctional, and why the functional one keeps winning because of that functionality. Even if they can't win on a level where they assimilate the other herd completely, there is, like, even as early as the first episode, Dinobot quits the Predacons because he's like, actually, you guys fucking suck, and those guys keep owning you because they clearly just know what they're doing more. Dinobot was always my favorite. I feel a very strong connection to this character, even not having really revisited Beast Wars very much. Power Rangers, similarly, is a small herd that fights off an enemy herd that explicitly wants to, like, enslave humanity, and so this little herd is protecting the greater herd of humanity. And with humans especially, I don't know if cows have a sense of like cowmanity. I don't know if cows know the state of cowhood in any kind of significant way. I don't know if their moos are communicating enough, cross pasture, that there's like a cow network of intelligence or anything like that. Because there are animals that are like that, like bees, where there is a level of interhive knowledge and like with bees, there's like a collectivism that's just on a whole different level from humans. They're beyond, hive is beyond the level of herd. Hive mind is even more integrated than herd mentality. I mean, because with hive mind, it's kind of like everybody is exactly the same except for the queen, who's just the director of the whole hive. Whereas with humanity, there are many more distinct roles within the herd. There's kind of an attempt to create a space for everyone there, and in the event that a herd gets too big is when it kind of splits and there becomes the litigation of how will we run separate herds, what will be the communication between them, and so on and so forth. So creativity has always been about making things better for the herd because that makes things better for yourself. Or making things better yourself because it makes things better for the herd. And if you have the mentality of like, well, fuck everybody else, it's really just about me, it will usually come to bite you in the ass, and that's why there is so much art about why you shouldn't be that way, because it won't just fuck you, it'll fuck everybody else, and we're constantly dealing with the consequences of greed. It's understandable why it seems obvious, like, well, if I take care of myself, then I will be successful. And it's like, the best way to take care of yourself is to be a part of a system that takes care of you. If you don't have to worry about most things because someone else around you that you trust is worried about those things, you got a lot fucking less to worry about. You will not die of stress as quickly if you are part of a functional herd. Now, when I was little, I started to have difficulties finding my place within the herd of school. I never fit in with my classmates because I had long hair, and girls would find out that I supposedly, according to myself, wasn't a girl and become scared of me, whereas boys just bullied me for looking like a girl and not conforming, you know? And I had a very nonconformist attitude because that's what my parents raised me with, but they didn't really teach me how to defend myself in my identity other than argumentativeness, which is what my mom uses. And I don't really think it's been successful for her in a social sense. I feel like she's actually gotten farther and farther from feeling like she is secure in a herd mentality because of this constant sense of like, well, I'm right and why don't other people see that? And it's like, because you have to be convincing. Like, being correct doesn't move the herd. You have to convince the herd to move. You are trying to make the herd believe you. Being right doesn't make people believe you, because why would they think you know? What have you done to show that you know? What have you done to prove that you should be listened to? And usually the answer to that is that either you can be very compelling in your argument or you can demonstrate the power of what you're talking about. I'm a lot better at demonstration. I'm not very good actually at in the moment making a counter argument because I tend to get too caught up in my own feelings about the thing. I understand why I like it, but that's not going to make you like it. I have to understand what you would like about it to draw you in. If I know somebody, I'm very good at recommending stuff to them because I know what their taste is and how to sell them something. I'm a great salesperson, but I'm not good at selling to everybody because I'm not interested in something that appeals to everybody. That's almost automatically going to be something very watered down and not that good. So I'm kind of getting off on a tangent here, but let me work my way back into the herd mentality. During the period of my childhood of like elementary school, where I felt like I didn't really know how to fit in with the herd, I was always trying to prove in some way how I might be like skilled or exceptional or like kind of show off. And again, this is something I kind of learned from my mom. She's always been somebody who wants to be recognized for her skills and for her creativity. So, I was always looking for avenues to kind of express that. And as a kid, just like having good grades was pretty satisfying at first. And then, there was a time we kind of made our own picture books. And when I go back through the picture books that I wrote back then, like the first few ones I wrote were just Beast Wars plot lines. Literally just me doing like my own little Beast Wars episodes. Incredibly simple, no sense of any kind of real storytelling. It's just like Optimus shot Megatron and then Megatron shot fucking whoever. But like I think my teacher in like the second grade was like, she was like excited that I wanted, because it was like we were tasked to make one book and I was like, I want to do more, this was fun. But she was like, you got to make them not about Beast Wars, because she couldn't follow what the fuck I was talking about. So and I was such a quiet kid, I could not explain at all. So like I started writing about my personal life and writing my own stories. And usually I just wrote about traumatic things that had happened. I remember writing about a time I fell into the pool and then my mom jumped in and rescued me. This was in like the third grade that I wrote this one. And then I remember through third and fourth grade, like having kind of journalized a whole bunch of just like little half page, or full page handwritten stories, just literally describing traumatic things that happened to me. And it was empowering, but also somewhat scary to realize that, like, being reminded of some of these things, some of them I felt like I got this unique edge over it by being able to describe it. Like, that now I had, but then sometimes it was like, I hadn't thought about how dark this actually is, that I felt this way, until reading it in the text. And, I first had to suicidal ideations, what could be considered an attempt. I put clothespins on my nose and mouth and try to suffocate myself when I was in like the third grade. It was too painful to wear clothespins, obviously. So I gave up on that. But like this was all just from a place of like being bullied and not knowing, not even as much bullied as ignored. You know, like through most of my school life, like I was very lightly bullied, but mostly just totally not addressed, you know? And I think it's just because I was so under socialized that the responses people would get were confusing. And I just had a very entitled expectation about how other people's communicate. Like I thought people would just innately be interested or helpful. You know, like I had this expectation that everybody else was like my mom because that's the only person I really knew, and my mom was always interested in me, and particularly there was, you know, long periods of when I was a baby that my dad was not around. So it was really just me and my mom. So like I felt very connected to her. But then when I was 6, my brother Shade was born, and she became really occupied with Shade. And so between the fact that like I didn't have the same ability to always have my mom's attention and I couldn't get attention from school, you know, my dad was working till like 9 p.m. for most of my childhood. So I rarely saw him during the day. And like we couldn't connect about anything because his hobbies are sports. You know, I didn't care about them at all. So this is kind of when I started, like my creative solution to this feeling of loneliness was to try to instill a lot of myself into my brother Victor, you know, where I was always talking to him and inventing stories, and like Victor reacted really well to emotional stories. And so I learned how to manipulate emotions really early in a simplistic way. And I started using it for evil at a very early age. Because I would tell Victor things like I would invent a character like Nene, or I'm just pretending to be a horse and going Nene. And then I'd be like, Victor, will you go get me a drink? And he'd be like, no. And I'd be like, if you don't, then Nene's going to die, you know? And then he'd cry. And then, you know, a couple of times it worked. So I kept trying and pushing it. And I would get more elaborate. And like I'd make up new Nenes just so that they were going to die too, you know? And eventually Victor, he became less so emotional about the nays and more so about the fact that I was doing this, you know, because he kind of caught on that this is a manipulation and like, why are you doing this, you know? And the answer is to have some level of control, you know, just to feel like someone's going to listen to me and do what I say because nobody else would, you know? And if Victor won't either, even with all my manipulation tactics, and it just feels like I'm totally powerless in this world, you know? So yeah, that's where bullying comes from, you know, and I know this now. I know all the people who were bullying me were in the same position of, you know, they probably were people who maybe wanted to wear their hair long, but their dad would have beat the shit out of them for that, you know, so that's why they're mad at me. And I understand, but I did not when I was a kid, so I was just miserable about it. I talked recently in a video about how art is created and operates on two levels. There's the conceptual and the literal physical experience of it. Like you look at something and you like looking at it. You hear it, you like hearing it. You taste it, you like how it tastes. And then there's also like the mental experience of comparing that taste to other flavors, thinking about lineages, you know, the nostalgia, the all the different things that play in the mind. And that's the stuff that tends to stay with you more. And so we tend to value things that have both. Like some people really don't care as much about the physical experience, or they are more open to uncomfortable physical experiences from the media. I consider my content to be somewhat physically uncomfortable. I use my voice to ground it, but the fact that there's not always music, that there's, you know, I have an odd pace of speaking, I'm saying weird things, I'm literally putting uncomfortable ideas out there. If I didn't have the smooth voice to help with some of that, it might be more difficult to listen to. But at the same time, there's plenty of stuff, like I talked about EDM before, that has great feel and almost no intellectual content unless you understand, again, like the lineage, what context the music is played in, but like just listening to it, it's totally a textural experience, which is fine, not at all an insult to it. It's just that kind of stuff tends to be more niche because people really want that synthesis of both things more than anything. Feels good, and you can't stop thinking about it. That's why GNX is so fucking good. Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, amazing thinking album. Not an amazing experience album. GNX is both. In light of that, you gotta consider, like, what kind of experience am I trying to have, and what kind of experience am I trying to create with my audience? When I was a little kid, I was very much just like stuck on cartoons and cozy shit. I think just because I found everything scary and stressful, and it never really let up. In fact, it only got worse. So I was always using cartoons as a means of escape. I really didn't put much thought into them beyond. I think I probably thought more about the Powerpuff Girls in most shows because the main characters were girls, and I had to kind of reconcile the fact that I supposedly didn't like anything to do with girls, but like loved this show. But I thought a lot about girl media for the reasons of this, this discomfort of, I'm not supposed to be a girl, but I like all these things for girls, and people keep calling me a girl. Why is this happening? But otherwise, like, I wasn't putting a lot of thought into the media I consumed until I discovered magazines. And magazines really engulfed me in this way where it was both satisfying to look at because you could bounce around and there's all these different articles and different subject matters and you're learning about all this different shit. I didn't really read them much at first. Like, I wasn't reading the articles. I would read the reviews, but mostly I was interested in the format and all the lists, because I was big into lists. So, like, Nintendo Power would always have, like, the user-voted top games lists, and then they'd have the reviews that had scores. And so, like, all that number stuff was what I really got fixated early on, because it was, like, this hard-coded idea of, like, okay, well, Ocarina of Time is, I guess, the greatest Nintendo game, because it's the only thing that's ever gotten a 9.8, back when they had really strict ratings on Nintendo Power. Or 98%, I think is how they framed it. And I think that the reason that it clicked with me so much is that it presented this thing that I loved as part of a herd mentality, that there were other people engaging with the same things I was. And even if those people weren't nearby to me, they existed somewhere out there in the world. Now, Pokemon did a lot for me socially at the height of its boom. When Pokemon first took off, for like a year, because I was so big into it, able to, play the games with people, play the cards with people. But when the fad wore off, it immediately became like on-site bullying for me still being into Pokemon. And I was still into it for like a solid 3.5 years before I just kind of got more into anime, and like moved on to something that felt even more social, because Pokemon had lost the social aspect of it. And like, I would go to Pokemon League every weekend, this was entirely a social thing for me, which is how it was built to be. And just the fact that, again, it fell off as a fad, I didn't have a replacement. I didn't have like I didn't learn enough in the course of the Pokemon fad to translate those skills. And moreover, I changed schools. Even though I still lived in the same house for those whole 4 years I was into Pokemon, in the second grade, I was at normal school. And then for third grade and half of fourth grade, I went to like a gifted school. Nobody knew who I was. I didn't meet like almost any Pokemon fans there. So, and it was mostly because a lot of those kids were like trying to act really adult. They were trying to act not childish because they thought they were like special and smart. So, I just had like a real rough time of this whole period of childhood of like, I don't feel like anybody around me is in my herd, and like I still felt like a part of my family, but I didn't connect with many of my family members. Eventually my cousin Boyd became like the main person that I connected with for most of my teen years. Like, he's the person who I looked up to, who I had the same taste as, who I communicated with the most. So I felt like between my immediate family and my cousin Boyd and, some of our relatives, that whether I really connected with them or knew them all that well, I still considered them like these are my family. I know who they are. I have a sense of them. They're part of the herd that I belong to. But as time went on, my family kept getting more and more dispersed and more dramatic with one another, where, they start having conflicts, and now I, as a kid who's viewing it as like, oh, you just like fucked over my mom, like now I have to hate you. And even if it's easy, it's like almost easier for my mom to forgive, her own like sister or something than it is for me, who at an impressionable time learned to dislike these people, to then try to reform relationships with them when I still don't really connect with a lot of them. So I kind of lost the sense of belonging to the herd of my family as the years went on, and I felt less and less connected. There's some people I still feel connected to, but like I've I just never was around any of those people, any of my extended family, enough to end up developing close proximity or like similar interests or similar viewpoints. Like, they just don't feel like people I know well enough to think, oh, they're in my herd. I felt more connected to the idea of Nintendo fandom, when I first got into magazines, and then anime fandom when I got into anime magazines, and started using the internet and participating in forums and feeling like, oh, I'm a member of this forum. There was a period really through a lot of my teens, like being a member of otaku boards and Mega Tokyo forums, each for like 2 or 3 years, at my of like peak usage. That was who I thought my herd was, and even then, I was constantly struggling with not having a place in that herd because I was way younger than everybody else using the internet back then. There was not, in the way that like I get these comments that are like, I've been watching you since I was 13, and I'm always like, oh god, and there's a lot of them. I get a lot of comments like that, and I'm like, when I was 13, there were no other 13-year-olds on the internet to speak of. It was me and a bunch of college kids who did not like that there were young people using the internet now, because this was pre-Facebook. This was before MySpace even, but like, because MySpace kind of got young people into the internet, and then Facebook got like Gen Xers into the internet, and then, once the iPhone came out, it was like, okay, everybody's using Facebook, so it became pervasive. But, and then Instagram and Twitter, really expanded that, YouTube. But the internet back then was not like that. So it was surreal for me to realize that, like, so many young people could have seen my content when at the time I didn't even realize there were so many young people that could see my content. I want you to really think about the social consequences of your content, because again, it is kind of about finding your place in the herd and figuring out what can be done to help the herd. Like, so if you are constantly counterproductive to herd mentality, then you are going to end up just always struggling, always making problems for yourself. And there are plenty of people who I can cite as examples, but there is something that I will call like the counter herd, right? There's the edgy side of each paradigm. So there's different kinds of edginess, right? Like, I'm edgy, and Shitty Kickflips is edgy just by the name, in the sense that, like, polite society, like, frowns on even the existence of, anything that they can't explain away as, like, part of normalcy right off the bat. But, like, actual herds, they know who's in them, ideally. And again, if you're trying to find your place in the herd, a part of that is making yourself identifiable. Other people are going to be able to figure out what you can do for them, but they have to know what you can do, you know? Um, so if you never let anybody know what you can do, they're never going to find a place for you. So that's an important aspect. Like, actually, that's the main reason to, like, get your art out there, is that, like, once other people see it, they'll figure out what they need from it. But you also have to be participant. If you're constantly resisting, a lot of artists, like, bitch about the place that they've been given a lot. Like, commission artists hate having to do commissions because they hate having to work with the people who can afford commissions. And it's like, you wouldn't love anymore having to work for a producer. You know, like, if you want to make money off of it, you have to work with the people who have money. Nobody's just going to pay you to do whatever you want, unless whatever you want happens to align with what they like to see, you know? And in my case, I've kind of developed my audience's taste. I've given them the expectation that whatever I do is going to be something they want to see because I do it, and they have a taste for what I do. It takes a lot to get people to feel that way, but not a lot of... It doesn't take a lot of time necessarily. It just takes a lot of presence in the content. Like, if your voice is unmistakable, such that by the end of one, 10-minute video, somebody feels like they understand your voice and style, then they're going to form a relationship with you right away. They're immediately going to decide whether or not you're a part of their herd, what place you have in their mental herd, their mind. Like, where do you belong in their conception of their place in the world and in relationship to you? Where do we stand? Like, first time I saw a Shitty Kickflips video, my first thought is like, oh, this reminds me of my content. Like, as soon as I got an email from Shitty Kickflips, it was an email I was anticipating. It was something I expected to happen because I know we're in this herd together. The reason that analysis in specific of media is what I fell on as my main creative output has entirely to do with herd mentality. It wasn't the thing that I wanted to do the most. It was the thing I got the best reaction to. It was the thing that made other people the happiest, that I got the most encouragement to continue doing, particularly within the clique that I was trying to fit in with on the internet at the time. And my ability to do it really developed out of having a taste for it. So it was kind of a positive feedback loop of seeing something I thought was cool, trying to do it, being encouraged to keep doing it, and therefore honing that skill. And what exactly does analysis mean? Like, what does it do? That's something that I've been navigating my whole career. But, like, where I'm at now is I am very much looking at it as this is something I use to either figure out what do I need to do to secure my place within the herd, or where do I need to direct the herd? What do I need to do to make things better for everybody that I consider to be related to me in some way? So what is related to me in some way? I tend to have a pretty scattershot view of, like, who I consider to be relevant to me, because pretty much anybody who inspires me at all, and especially to whatever degree they inspire me, I tend to view as like a part of my world, even if they have no awareness of who I am, or only the most vague awareness, or if I'm definitively not really that close to them in a herd sense. But I do tend to think of those people as, like, I want to do something for them or have some kind of involvement. And sometimes when I realize I can't, as much as I love their content, if I feel like they are safe within what they've built for themselves, then I don't feel like I need to do much. Like, bringing up Dochi one more time just because I've brought her up already, like, that's somebody who clearly has people around her who understand what she's doing and can help her realize it. If there was something Dochi needed from, let's say, an anime expert who also understands hip-hop and is a fan of her, she would come to me. But I don't think that's ever going to happen. I don't think Dochi needs me for anything. I don't know. Maybe one day we'll find out. But when I look at her, I don't think, oh, I have to do something for Dochi. I celebrated her through making a long video about her and through continuing to talk about her, but that's really more for me to kind of introspectively understand what am I getting out of this and how do I give that to my people. It's not really as much for her as it is me, hoping that she will gain something from the fact that she is also inspiring me and the people in my group, but it's really for them to share in that inspiration. I consider myself to be in the same tribe with Dochi in the sense of queerness, having a very like broad lens of queerness that there's you should really not think of yourself by any specific label, but just by what you are trying to express in the moment, like who are you now is what matters. And the fact that there's not really a ton of people who really understand that mentality makes me feel more connected to her, even if it's not that we have tons of other things we see the same way necessarily. Just that is such a powerful thing that I get out of so few artists. And then there's also similar tastes where it's clear we grew up listening to at least some of the same music. We are fans of some of the same music, and so there's that sense of history, that sense of her place within this lineage that I understand and connect with. So, that's why even if I don't think I'm a part of her smaller herd, I'm going to use the Kendrick Lamar Super Bowl analogy again. I brought this up in a recent video about how it's about the three levels of game Kendrick's playing: the game of being American, the game of being a Black American, the game of being, Kendrick Lamar doing a performance at the Super Bowl, like a commentary on what the nature of a football game is. Just all. I said three layers of game, but my point is that there's all these different ways you can look at yourself as a part of something. And the closer the thing is, the more effect it has on you. And so I think that if you want to have the most effective creativity, you should target whatever is closest to you. Don't worry about trying to have the broadest appeal possible, because you don't want to be in the same herd with people that are going to abuse you or run it wrongly. You don't want to be in the fucking Predacons or the Decepticons or whatever. You want to be in the Maximals, at least from your perspective. You want it to feel like you are part of a functional team that produces victory, as opposed to something that's dying out or losing because of its inability to function as a herd. Now, if you find that you are part of a dysfunctional herd or that you cannot find your place within a herd, this leaves you with two options. No, three options. You can either change yourself to fit in better, change the herd so that you fit in better as who you currently are, or change what herd you're a part of. Just go join another herd that seems more like the one you belong to. Now, for a lot of queers especially, the fact that we have to do that is what draws us together. Like the fact that for a lot of us, there is no place within our immediate herd. There's no place within our community, there's no place within our family. It draws us outward to try to seek community in a broader lens, and so we start connecting with other people on the basis of sharing this queerness. But then once you realize that you might be different in all these other ways, there's all these other gaps to bridge, and so no matter what, there's going to be some level of disconnect between you and the next person. So it's not like you should never view anybody with proximity to you as like something that maybe you should work to get closer to. Like, I guess what I'm trying to say is you should never expect it to be effort free to just fit in with a herd. Don't just leave your herd because you feel like, oh well, I would have to change a little bit about myself to fit in. If you would have to change so much that it would ruin your life, or if it is currently ruining your life because you can't be who you want to be, you might have no choice but to go find another herd. But when you get there, you're not just gonna slot right in. you know? It's going to be a process of figuring out how to belong in that other place. When I was on internet forums, like I said, I really struggled to have a sensation of being a part of the herd because it felt like people who read my stuff were usually more annoyed with it than they were enthusiastic about it. But as my blog went along and I was just, really insistent on trying to get people to read me, when I finally wrote something people liked and I started going more in that direction, then I started to identify as a member of this herd of like the hardcore otaku, hardcore English speaking otaku, basically. People who know a lot about Japan, who know a lot about anime history, but who, live in America, speak English, speak mostly to other English speaking fans. So, like, that was the sub community I was a part of, and I felt like it was like we had a few hundred people, even if it wasn't enough to like make money or for money to go around this circuit, because we're not really like producing anything valuable to outside economies or even within this economy in like a barter sense. Nonetheless, on a spiritual level, it felt like I was getting what I wanted out of my creativity. And so, like, throughout high school, I was dedicating a lot of time to my anime blog, particularly the last couple years. Like, once I discovered the kind of lane that I was in, I was really going all in on like writing all the time and trying to figure out like what are the parameters of what I'm good at, what am I capable of here in this space. But I also had a lot of problems with the group I was a part of. And so a lot of that contention that I had within the herd was that I felt it needed to be steered in a different direction, and nobody would listen to me because I didn't have enough perspective. I didn't, wasn't capable of communicating what I'm trying to say well enough. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm wrong, but I would be wrong if I tried to give direction. Like, I might be right that we're going in the wrong direction, but I would not be right if I told you what direction to go in instead. Those are kind of two different things. So I felt like I had this constant sense of, all right, I know I'm in this group and this is the only group I feel like I kind of belong to, but I also feel like I don't belong to it because, like, I don't like the other people that are here, or like I think they need to change, or I think that the atmosphere here needs to change in order for me to really feel like I belong here. And really what I needed was something else, to create my own community, my own, like, something built around my idea of how things should be. But I didn't have a clear enough sense of what that is or how to go about that or who am I looking to be around, And that's the kind of the thing that challenges me the most with being a creative is, like, if you're looking at it as like this is my herd, I think a lot of creative people associate with other creatives and view that as their herd and not the audience. They view there's like this disconnect where it's like, well, anybody can consume my stuff. I can't control that. So I'm not going to worry about who consumes it aside from the people I actually work with or that I know in a more personal sense. Maybe you have friends who like your content, but you don't view them as like your fans or consumers. And the thing about that is, like I said, I like the environment of like going to a convention and meeting my fans. And I've had plenty of experiences where I met my fans and I was uncomfortable. And some of that was on just me like not knowing what to expect from like interactions with lots of different types of people. And some of it is like the type of person I was attracting with my content. And there's different ways I'm uncomfortable. So it's not like any one particular group of people, but there's just, there's certain like mentalities that I I created through the way I presented myself about how I could be approached or spoken to, that once, I've been in the situation, it's like I would have, I would have liked to try to I would have liked to have tried to understood who I wanted to appeal to and then made content that appealed to those people rather than just making whatever I want and seeing who likes it. Because whatever I want doesn't necessarily get me what I want. Does that make sense? Like, if I just create whatever's in my head, a lot of the time it is an expression of lacking that does not then get me closer to having. It just is me saying that I'm missing something. I keep saying I'm missing something. But saying you're missing something, like, is basically asking the world to suggest what it could be. And, in my case, there are certain things like with the trans thing, right? Like, other people noticed before me because there were just so many hints. There was so much undercurrent of what I was saying. And like, the number of comments I get from people who transitioned before me is staggering. Like, people who were fans of mine who transitioned and then realized that I was trans later, and then like in retrospect understood that there was a connection there. Like, it's just one of those things that should have been obvious, but because of the people I surrounded myself with and the world I put myself in, it wasn't obvious to me, because I didn't think of myself as part of that community, part of that herd. I thought of that as a different group that doesn't have to do with me. And even when I started transition, I had a really hard time viewing myself as a part of the trans community because a lot of the herds within that herd, I don't feel like a part of. And I feel like they have kind of a controlling voice within the meta herd of transness, where like if there's only a few really loud trans voices that people really rally behind, it kind of feels like everybody else is just swallowed up, and like the idea of what the trans community is basically represented by these subherds that, again, I'm now looking at like, I'd like to change the direction of the trans herd. But that involves, first of all, building a herd around myself, and then that being like a loud and effective herd that other ones want to follow, and then, creating that multiplication of influence, all of which is difficult and takes effort and takes, again, really conscious drive. You have to know what you're trying to do, how to explain it to other people, be convincing, make them believe it, and continue winning. Actually do, in fact, succeed through your art. And every time you take L's, that's what you're going to become known for, unless you really undo that reputation. I mentioned earlier that there's sort of a edgy abyss that you can fall into, where if your mentality is always like, I don't follow the crowd, I don't follow the crowd, there inevitably is a crowd that forms around you of other people who are saying, I don't follow the crowd, but like, there's not enough room. There's not enough room for all of these people to like if you go to stand in the corner and somebody else goes to stand in the corner, eventually you got a group of people in the corner, and that group then has to try to litigate its own rules. And if it's a bunch of people who all have trust issues who won't listen to one another, then it just becomes this like sort of crabs in a bucket, like fighting. Go watch Technolize. Actually, it's a great show about this, about how when you just keep pushing marginalized people further and further into the margins until the point that there's no sense of trust, because everybody's like, well, there's nothing that could be done. Like, everybody who's had an idea has failed. There's the system has created an inability of success. And a lot of people feel that way about the world now because they feel that they cannot be comfortable because the herd is suffering. But a lot of that sensation psychologically is being done to you by the news. And it's being done on purpose to put you in a weakened mind state that will make you more likely to succumb to your addictions. And addiction is where profit comes from. It's how big business operates. It's how power stays in power, is by keeping you addicted to what only they can give you in so many different ways. Addiction, compulsion might be a better word, just whatever it is that they can create in you an expectation that you will need this thing, that you rely on this thing for happiness, that you need it in your life. It's kind of like irrational to actually concern yourself with the human race or the United States or the state that you live in. All right, I gotta wrap this video up. This is taking up too much of my day, and I feel like I could rant endlessly now that I've gotten onto this herd mentality topic, but I feel like I've probably said enough for you to understand the general point here. You've got to figure out, what am I trying to do with this art? Is it to make me money? Is it to make me friends? Is it to gain respect? Is it to change something about culture? How much culture am I trying to change? Am I just trying to make things better for the people I care about? Am I trying to make things better for, a whole category of people? And you have to accept there are like definite limitations in how much effect you can have. But if you keep having an effect, it it radiates. Like if you affect somebody, then they affect somebody else. It gets paid forward. And so as long as you remain effective, you will continue to see the effects of your influence. If you are ineffective, you'll realize that because you aren't seeing any effects of your influence. If you have been trying to make someone's life better and it's not improving, whether it's yours or someone else's, you got to change tactics. You got to try something else. Use more imagination, use more creativity. But remember, the point of it is to improve the situation. The point of it is to make things more comfortable, to solve problems, even if it's just a problem of boredom or loneliness or trauma that you feel you can't express without some kind of outlet. You have to give yourself those opportunities, listen to what you're saying through what you're doing, refine what you're doing so that it is more effective. And, again, don't do anything that people tell you to that don't know what you're trying to do. Everyone else has been poisoned by what they think is supposed to, like how they think shit's supposed to be. And they're going to put that on you, whether they really understand what you're trying to do or not. Don't listen to people who don't know what you're doing. If somebody is almost 100% on your side, but they have a contention about one thing, might be worth listening to, litigating that. But if somebody is a total outsider and they're giving you advice on, like, if somebody shows up to my comments and starts trying to give me advice on how to make more people like my videos, I'm going to dismiss that comment because they clearly aren't paying attention. Like, if you're watching the videos, I'm clearly trying to cultivate an audience. I'm not trying to grow an audience. I'm trying to cultivate an audience, like a bonsai tree, like it's a very specific image I want. I am not looking for something that's untamed and unkempt because I had that and I didn't like it. I want something particular and aesthetic, So that is my art of process, is developing the resonant aesthetic that will move people, that will move the herd where I want it to go, where I think it needs to go so that all of us are healthier, all of us are happier. I can feel myself becoming healthier and happier because of the effects of my influence. All right. All right. All right.